Check out our exclusive documentary on the rise and fall of ISIS or our video on Israel's modern military over on our website, armchairhistory.tv. Thanks for your support. After 8 years of war in Iran, Iraq became the leading regional power in the Middle East. Iraq's fight against Iran's revolutionary Shia ideology and its staunch opposition to Israel made its dictator, Saddam Hussein, immensely popular throughout the Sunni Arab world. By 1990, the Iraqi army had ballooned into the fourth largest military in the world, with plenty of combat-hardened soldiers filling its ranks. However, the Iran-Iraq War proved to be a double-edged sword. It cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and left Iraq with mountains of debt. Much of that debt was owed to the small emirate to its south, Kuwait. While geographically small, Kuwait was incredibly wealthy and had been an important financial ally to Iraq during the war. In less than 2 years, however, this alliance morphed into hostility. Saddam believed that the other Arab states owed Iraq for taking on the common cause against Iran and demanded debt forgiveness. The list of grievances to Kuwait in particular increased. Iraq accused Kuwait of illegally tapping its oil reserves, overproducing its OPEC quota, and even conspiring with Israel and the West to keep oil prices low and bankrupt Arab nations. Additionally, Iraq denied the legitimacy of the Kuwaiti state. The area had historically been part of the Ottoman Basra province, which in Saddam's eyes legally made the region rightfully part of Iraq following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. As a high-profile YouTuber and content creator, I'm no stranger to having personal information being made available on the internet. Data brokers and people search sites like White Pages, My Life, and Spokeo compile sensitive personal information from public records and either publish them online to drive traffic to their sites or sell them to anyone for a fee, exposing not just your home address, phone numbers, and emails, but also credit scores, income ranges, and family connections, putting you at risk of spam, phishing, online scams, fraud, identity theft, and even stalking and home attacks. That's why I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, OwnerRep, a fully automated privacy service that removes your profiles from more than 200 people. Search sites and Google by identifying the exact pages where your personal data is exposed and sending opt-out requests for every profile found on your behalf. If a website shares more than one listing with your personal information, OwnerRep not only removes all of them, but also continuously monitors data brokers to make sure that your private info stays off the internet. OwnerRep's visual dashboard gives you a complete view of your personal data exposure and detailed removal stats, ensuring maximum transparency during the removal process. Plus, you'll get monthly reports straight to your inbox to keep you informed. Sign up for OwnerRep right now and get 50% off an annual subscription for you or your family. OwnerRep is backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee, and you even have a trial period to see how it works and experience all the benefits. Support our channel by clicking on the link in the description below and start protecting you and your family's privacy today. Iraq's ambitions directly clashed with American interests. Since the Second World War, the United States committed to defending Saudi Arabia, especially due to its massive oil reserves. Franklin D. Roosevelt himself had stated that the defense of Saudi Arabia is vital to the United States. Throughout the 1980s, American support became even stronger. The U.S. was determined to guarantee the territorial integrity and the internal stability of Saudi Arabia. As it turned out, Saddam's invasion of Kuwait proved ample reason for the United States to act on its guarantee. The Iraqi invasion of Kuwait was swift and surprising. Within a single day, Saddam's army overran their underprepared and under-equipped adversaries, Starting out at 2 a.m. on August 2nd, the elite Iraqi Republican Guard swept through the emirate. Just 4 hours later, they besieged Dasman Palace, the residence of Emir Jabir al-Ahmad al-Sabah, who fled to Saudi Arabia. Scattered pockets of resistance continued for 2 days. Although Iraq secured Kuwait quickly, most Kuwaiti officials, the vast majority of the Air Force, and a few army brigades escaped into Saudi Arabia. The world quickly voiced its overwhelming disapproval of the invasion. One of the strongest reactions came from the U.S. President George H.W. Bush. His disapproval was influenced by British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who was one of the first people Bush spoke to after the invasion. She compared the invasion to appeasement in the 1930s, saying that Saddam would have the whole Gulf at his mercy, and 65% of the world's oil with it, if his aggression were not quickly checked. A more panicked reaction emerged in Saudi Arabia, who feared that they were next on Saddam's chopping block. King Fahd quickly reached out to the United States to organize a thorough defense of the country and keep Saddam from invading Saudi Arabia. Throughout the world, nations flocked to condemn Saddam's invasion and annexation of Kuwait. All 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council implemented sanctions and placed arms embargoes on Iraq. The UN initially tried to get Saddam to withdraw from Kuwait through economic pressure. However, as it became increasingly clear that Saddam remained defiant, the Security Council passed Resolution 678. This legally authorized UN member states to use all necessary means to force Iraq to withdraw if it hadn't left by January 15, 1991. As the world pressured Iraq, Saddam unleashed brutal measures on the Kuwaiti population. Civilians were terrorized by arrests, torture, kidnapping, rape, and murder. People who were suspected of members of the Kuwaiti resistance were brutally tortured and publicly executed. The Iraqis looted Kuwait for all it was worth. According to an official in the Kuwaiti reconstruction program, the Iraqis stole everything that could be loaded onto a 5-ton truck and carried it away. Automobiles, typewriters, telephones, domestic appliances, furniture, and every other possible sort of moving possession. To protect Saudi Arabia and prepare for the liberation of Kuwait, the United States launched Operation Desert Shield on August 7, 1990. The goals were to defend Saudi Arabia while simultaneously building a massive concentration of aircraft, armored vehicles, and naval presence for the expected military campaign in Kuwait. The operation was a major logistical challenge. The buildup concentrated in the desolate, sweltering northeast of Saudi Arabia. Although the modern infrastructure in the region eased the challenge, inefficient numbers of available ships, aircraft, and trucks made transporting the heavy equipment very difficult. The list of nations committing to fight Saddam rapidly grew throughout 1990. Regional rivals like Syria and Egypt eagerly supported the coalition. Additionally, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker convinced dozens of other nations to join and check Iraq's aggression. However, the large coalition was troubled by intricate command structures and cultural rivalry. France, in particular, sought strategic autonomy and only wanted to allow French troops to use French air bases. Arab troops preferred to only strike Iraqi targets in Kuwait, since those could be justified as an attack on Iraqi aggression rather than an attack on Muslim civilians. Despite these differences, the coalition was able to balance operational flexibility and autonomy with a unified strategy. By January 15, 1991, the coalition consisted of 42 countries and about 900,000 soldiers under the commands of U.S. General Norman Schwarzkopf and Saudi General Khalid bin Sultan. Facing them were over 1 million Iraqi soldiers, including the fearsome and powerful Republican Guard. These elite units were the cream of the crop in the Iraqi military, the most loyal, most disciplined, best trained, and best equipped that Saddam had to offer. When the deadline for withdrawal passed, and Saddam showed no sign of giving in, Operation Desert Shield transformed into Operation Desert Storm. The attack started with an extensive bombing campaign, which quickly overwhelmed Iraq. Within a week, the coalition established absolute air superiority. With over 1,000 sorties per day, they leveled Iraq's infrastructure and industry. Iraq's previously feared air defenses proved to be no match. The coalition aircraft flew too fast and too high. Of the almost 3,000 aircraft the coalition sent in, it only lost just 75. Saddam responded by firing wildly inaccurate Scud missiles at the coalition armies and toward neutral Israel. He hoped that by dragging Israel into the coalition, the anti-Israel Arab coalition members would leave, causing the alliance to fall apart. Despite launching missiles, for 6 weeks, Israel did not retaliate. The attacks were expected, and Bush had urged Israel not to get involved. In reaction, the United States supplied anti-missile systems to Israel and ramped up its bombing of Iraqi launching sites. During the first 2 weeks of Operation Desert Storm, the war mostly involved artillery duels and bombing sorties. The coalition made a few reconnaissance missions in Kuwait, but no large-scale land fighting had occurred. Saddam, worried over falling morale amidst the never-ending bombardments, attempted to provoke the coalition into a land battle. If he could just inflict a single decisive blow, the war would become too costly for the Americans. Thus, he took the initiative and sent his troops to occupy the Saudi border city of Khafji. Iraqi troops smashed through the eastern flank of the coalition and entered the city. King Fahd, outraged that Iraqi soldiers were on Saudi soil, ordered the immediate recapture of the city. Although the ensuing battle was vicious, the Iraqi soldiers were outmatched, especially due to overwhelming coalition air power. After just 36 hours, the Iraqis fled to the Kuwaiti border. Although the battle was a tactical win for the coalition, Iraqi leaders claimed victory to bolster their troops' flagging morale. It took 3 more weeks of back-and-forth artillery fire, maneuvering, and skirmishing before the ground invasion was ready. On February 22, 1991, Bush sent a final ultimatum to Saddam: leave Kuwait within 24 hours or face a ground invasion. Saddam rejected the ultimatum and, in revenge, ramped up the destruction of Kuwait, especially by destroying its oil wells. The explosion of over 600 oil wells served both to punish Kuwait and to raise a smokescreen against the invader. The ground campaign, codenamed Operation Desert Sabre, seemed to be a daunting task. Numerous Iraqi forces were deeply entrenched in Kuwait, and Saddam kept his elite Republican Guard in reserve near the Iraq-Kuwait border. Should Kuwait be overrun, they would be able to prevent a coalition advance into Iraq proper. The expectations were that the coalition would launch its main thrust into Kuwait from the south, possibly supported by an amphibious assault. The coalition actually launched its main thrust further west, deep into the Arabian Desert. The main objective was to cut off the Iraqi forces in Kuwait, encircle the Republican Guard, and destroy it. The coalition offensive lasted only 100 hours, a little over 4 days. One of the first objectives of the ground war was the capture and establishment of a fort base deep inside Iraqi territory. In one of the deepest airborne operations in history, American forces buried the 101st Airborne Division 100 kilometers or 62 miles behind enemy lines. Simultaneously, the first armored thrusts pierced deep into Iraqi territory. French tanks and armored vehicles advanced toward the town of Al-Sarman, neutralizing a mechanized infantry division during their assault. While the coalition forces advanced in the west, American and Arab forces began breaking through the Iraqi defenses in Kuwait proper. The coalition dominated the battlefield. A well-thought-out strategy was complemented with superior technology, like the M1A1 Abrams battle tank, and complete air superiority. Iraqi morale was also extremely low, making the assaults very one-sided. Iraqi soldiers surrendered in droves, with many being so anxious to surrender that they gave themselves up to the first foreigners that they encountered. In one notable incident, a dozen Iraqi soldiers surrendered to an Italian news crew in broken Italian. Throughout the next 2 days, coalition forces would press further into Iraq and cut off all paths of retreat for the Iraqi armies in Kuwait. As forces in the desert drove for the Euphrates River, those in Kuwait progressively moved up the coast toward Kuwait City, assisted by naval gunfire. Although wind, rain, and smoke from burning oil fields hampered progress, coalition forces progressed steadily. The black smoke in particular led American Marines to nickname Kuwait the Land of Darkness, which helped provide a concealment to Iraqi forces attempting to counter coalition forces. Regardless of Iraqi concealment, attacks like the one near Al-Barkan were quickly defeated. That same day, Saddam ordered all remaining units to withdraw from Kuwait to the Basra area. While Iraqi troops embarked on their exodus from Kuwait, the fiercest phase of the war was yet to begin. There had been a few tank-on-tank skirmishes, but only on February 26th would the tank war truly begin. More than 3,000 tanks and 1,000 more armored vehicles fought in 3 separate but closely related battles. The battles of 73 Easting and Norfolk near the Iraq-Kuwait border, and the Battle of Medina Ridge a bit further north. During the Battle of 73 Easting, U.S. General Frederick Frank's 7th Army Corps engaged the Tawakalna Division of the Republican Guard. Despite terrible weather, poor visibility, and Iraqi numerical superiority, the Americans dominated. After 6 hours of vicious battle, the United States suffered just 23 casualties. They lost a single armored fighting vehicle and didn't lose any of their tanks. Iraq suffered up to 1,000 casualties and lost 180 armored fighting vehicles and 160 tanks. The Battle of Norfolk, fought just 2 hours later and nearby, followed a similar pattern, also referred to as Fright Night. The Battle of Norfolk was an even larger battle than 73 Easting and fought in the dead of night. Without night vision goggles, it was impossible to see which tank was on which side during the fighting. The fighting itself was chaotic but lopsided. But after the dust settled, coalition armies were once again victorious, while close to 600 Iraqi tanks had been destroyed. The final major tank battle, Medina Ridge, marked the last stand of the Republican Guard during the war. This was arguably the quickest and most decisive victory the American Army achieved over the Republican Guard. In just a couple hours, the opposing armored divisions had been decimated, leaving the desert littered with hundreds of burning Iraqi tanks and armored personnel carriers. While these tank battles raged, one of the most infamous episodes of the Gulf War took place. American, French, British, and Canadian ground and air forces attacked the main highway between Kuwait and Iraq on the night of February 26th to February 27th, which thousands of Iraqi soldiers and civilians used in their retreat from Kuwait. When the attack was over, thousands of vehicles lay burnt or abandoned by the roadside, their occupants either dead or fled. Although the death toll is officially unknown, estimates range from hundreds to over 1,000 casualties. The carnage earned this stretch of pavement the nickname the Highway of Death. The campaign ended after only 100 hours. The few Iraqi units that remained in Kuwait to cover the Iraqi retreat were defeated during the Battle of Kuwait International Airport on February 27th. This battle marked the liberation of Kuwait City and the end of the Kuwaiti theater of the war. A ceasefire was negotiated shortly after. The United States and the United Nations had achieved their goal. Kuwait was restored. Saddam's ability to wage war was crippled, and the status quo in the Middle East was preserved. Despite its win on the battlefield, the coalition failed to achieve a strategic victory. Saddam remained in power, and the Republican Guard was not destroyed. However, the United States was unwilling to pursue the war. American officials argued that getting rid of Saddam would result in a costly and lengthy occupation, which was not worth the additional American casualty. The United States thus also did not support Shia and Kurdish uprisings against Saddam following the ceasefire. Although Bush had encouraged Iraqis to resist Saddam, he would not aid them. Within half a year, Saddam would violently crush these uprisings. Despite its short duration, the Gulf War caused extensive damage. The oil fires in Kuwait continued for 8 more months, and the Kuwaiti economy was devastated. Additionally, the oil fires and oil spills caused extensive environmental damage. While Kuwait would recover relatively quickly, Iraq was in shambles. Around 175,000 Iraqis, both civilian and military, had died. Iraq's GDP had fallen by over 64%. Living standards deteriorated, and the overwhelming majority of its electric grid, industrial capacity, and infrastructure lay in ruin. In addition, sanctions and embargoes on the nation made it next to impossible for Iraq to rebuild. The Gulf War left Iraq an international pariah. Saddam had waged war on the world, and the world had won, albeit not decisively. Saddam was not gone, and to American policymakers he remained a threat. The United States answered this threat by keeping Iraq on a close leash, interfering and bombing the country regularly. The troublesome relations between Saddam's Iraq and the United States would eventually set the scene for yet another, even more devastating, Second Gulf War. Don't forget to check out our website, Armchair History TV. If you use our code, FreeHistory, you can watch our new documentary on the rise and fall of ISIS completely for free.